Hey, what's up guys? Ethan Hamrick here with Wish Upon a Fish. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a few tips to keep in mind when you're fishing behind or around cold fronts. Stay tuned. Alright guys, so we all know that cold fronts can be an issue and can roll through at any time during the winter and even into the spring. As fishermen, we kind of have to learn to fish around them and catch bass during them. And there's some things I like to keep in mind when I'm fishing around cold fronts that help me catch more fish. First of all, the most important thing I like to keep in mind when I'm fishing around a cold front is the water temperature. Water temperature is a huge deal during the winter time and even into the early spring. And this is because the colder the water is, the more lethargic bass are going to be. They're looking for the warmest water they can find and for structures that can hold warmth. So looking for water that's maybe just 1, 2, maybe 3 degrees warmer makes a huge difference. It may not seem like much to us, but it makes a huge difference to those fish when that water's cold. Now when I'm looking for those areas where the water's going to be a little bit warmer than the rest of the lake, what I'm looking for is areas out of the wind, especially the cold north wind. So coves, bays, inlets, creeks, canals, anything like that. I'm also looking for places on the west bank that may be protected from the wind. The sun rises in the east, so the most sunlight is going to fall on the west side of a lake throughout a day. Also what I'm looking for are large pieces of cover, such as large trees or timber, big rocks, even boat docks, and large maybe mats of vegetation and grass, anything like that, because those structures are going to hold warmth and draw those fish to them because they're holding that warmth. Now another thing I like to do around a cold front is plan my day accordingly. A lot of times during the winter and even into the spring, when that water is cold, I like to maybe start my day a little bit later. So what I like to do is let that sun get up a little bit and start warming that water. Anywhere from around 10 o'clock to somewhere in the afternoon around 4 or 5 o'clock is that best time window around those cold fronts on those real cold days. In my opinion, I've found that fishing that midday window is the best when you're fishing around cold fronts. So just plan your day accordingly to maximize your time on the water when it's cold. Now another thing that a lot of anglers don't do this time of year when they should is slow down. Fishing slow is tough to do. It's one of my weaknesses for sure. I don't like fishing slow. I like to fish fast. But during the winter and into the early spring, when you have cold fronts, slowing your approach is crucial because these fish, they have a lower metabolism. They don't want to move as quick. They don't really want to chase down a bait as fast. So it's key to slow down, to slow your approach, be more precise with your cast. Don't get in a big hurry. Just try to fish those key areas where fish are likely to be holding. That's what a lot of people try to do, is just take a moving bait and just fish as fast as they can and try to cover water. A lot of times that's a mistake because, like I said, fish don't want to chase a bait down when the water's real cold. So I like to just slow my approach, not fish as fast, not try to cover as much water. Just fish an area well. A lot of times that produces the most bites when I'm fishing around a cold front. Now another thing that I like to do, it goes along with fishing slow, is making more than one cast of the same piece of structure. And I'll end up catching a fish off of it on the 4th, 5th, maybe even 10th cast, because those fish, a lot of times they won't eat it on the first time. They won't react to it that first time that bait falls in there. But if you keep pitching that bait right at the same spot, it'll agitate those fish enough and make them eat it eventually. Now another thing to keep in mind when you're fishing around cold fronts is to use a more finesse approach. For example, easy meals is what I'm kind of looking for this time of year. So, such as a jig, something like a jig here. Any type of jig is a great option this time of year. A small swim bait on a jig head is another great option fishing around cold fronts. Just fish slow around that cover and vegetation. Another great option. Looks like a fleeing bait fish. Also a shaky head worm is another great option. Super slow finesse approach. It's a very slow technique, so you got to have patience with it. But it's a super reliable bait to turn to, is the shaky head worm. Just a trick worm rigged up on that shaky head jig head. And that's another great option for fishing cold water around cold fronts. Also, if you want to fish a little bit faster but still leave that bait in the strike zone for longer periods of time, giving those fish a chance to react to the bait, I also will often turn to a hard suspending jerkbait. These baits will suspend in the water column for long periods of time, allowing those fish to come check it out and just giving them more time to react to that bait. So a hard jerkbait's another good option for fishing around cold fronts. Two more good tactics I like to try is slow rolling a spinnerbait. Slow roll spinnerbait along shoreline grass, along seawalls, docks, anything like that. Just slow rolling it where those blades are barely moving. If I can just barely get those blades to turn, that's what I'm looking for this time of year when I'm fishing around those cold fronts. And also, a lot of times I like to use a rattle trap or a lipless crankbait. And I'll just like to yo-yo it around this certain structures. If I'm fishing over like a sandbar, a drop off, a ledge, a brush pile, a rock pile, I'll turn to that lipless crankbait a lot of times. And I like the yo-yo retrieve this time of year where I just hop the bait off the bottom, let it fall back to the bottom, hop it, let it fall, hop it, let it fall. It looks like a dying shad or an injured bait fish. And those fish a lot of times just can't stand that retrieve and will most of the time hit the bait on the fall. I've got a lot of fish doing that this time of year around those cold fronts. So those are all great techniques and reliable lures to turn to. Now finally, the last thing I like to do when I'm fishing around cold fronts is to downsize my tackle. A lot of times when the water's cold, a cold front comes through, the pressure changes, the bass become more wary of things and aren't as apt to bite. So anything you can do to make your bait and your presentation look as natural as possible will increase your chances of catching those fish. For example, instead of using 15 or 20 pound line, I might go down to 10 or 12 pound line. Or also, I like to downsize my lures. Instead of using a ½ ounce lipless crankbait, I might go down to a 1/4 ounce. Or instead of using a larger, like ½ ounce jig, I may go down to a 1/4 ounce jig. And instead of using larger, 8 or 10 inch worms that are thicker and wider and have a bigger profile, I might go down to a 4 or 5 inch worm that has a smaller profile and is easier for those fish to eat. One other thing I like to do is take my jig trailers and I'll break them. I'll tear a part of them off. I'll break them in half or tear a section of them off because it decreases the profile of that bait and makes it easier for those fish to eat and often make them more willing to go after it and eat it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Try to keep these tips in mind the next time you're out in the water bass fishing, fished before, behind a cold front. Use the thermometer on your depth finder or graph to locate some of the warmest water possible. And if you don't have a depth finder on your boat or you're fishing off the bank, try to just focus on those key areas such as places out of the wind, the west side of the lake, and those structures that are going to hold warmth. Also try to plan your trips later in the day, slow your approach when you're fishing, and downsize your tackle, and you may be surprised at how many fish you can put in the boat. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe to our channel up in this corner, check out our last video on dock fishing in this corner, and some of our other videos down below. And there'll be a lot more exciting and helpful fishing videos headed your way. We'll talk to you soon.